Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today we're going to talk about bushcraft. Are the practitioners of bushcraft deluding themselves into partaking in this traditionalist fantasy of sorts, or are there merits and value, of course, to the person practicing it, to learning these skills and to putting yourself in these restricted situations even though you don't have to, by limiting the use of certain modern technology just because you want to do it a certain way. Let's talk about it. Alright, on the topic of technology, look at this beast of a saw. Look at the curvature on that thing. It's the curve that cuts. This is why you're never going to get a bow saw that cuts as fast as a silky saw, because, well, for a variety of reasons, but one of them is that wicked arc. This Sugawaza, although it doesn't have my favorite sheath, this is the fastest cutting fixed blade silky saw that you can get. Now I'm going to post a link to my website. I'm going to post a coupon code there as well for 10% off, let's say, for my viewers and my viewers only. You're the only one who's going to see that code. That's going to give you an excellent deal on this saw that you're not going to find anywhere else, because my prices are already very competitive. That is one of the wildest saws you'll ever use. Alright, so Chris Tanner at the Prepared Mind 101 made a video recently about batoning. It was a 30-minute rant, and I listened to all of it. I find Chris to be very entertaining, has a very sarcastic, witty sense of humor that I enjoy. I get a kick out of. So he brought up the topic of what I'll call bushcraft zealotry. Overzealous bushcrafters. People who are religiously into bushcraft when they don't necessarily have to be. And that might take the form of restricting yourself to more primitive technology when you know that there's better technology available. For instance, restricting yourself to some archaic bow saw technology that's going to require more energy to use. Proven fact, it's going to require more energy to cut wood with a bow saw. Or you could invest the resources into getting something which is going to allow you to live more comfortably. But I'm going to make arguments for both, because I don't want to just piss off the bushcrafters. Not because I don't want to piss you off, but because I think there are merits to your arguments as well. And I know that not all people who practice bushcraft do it for this reason. Some people just practice it for the Boy Scout aspect, to have those primitive skills if they never had any technology at their disposal. Could they light a fire? Could you snare an animal? Could you filter water without having any tools from the modern world whatsoever if you had to? Some people do it for that particular reason. But then there's another group of people who are perhaps transitioning into sustainability, becoming a more fixed way of life, where they're doing it, or they're putting themselves into these situations when they really don't have to. And I heard Black Scout Survival, I didn't actually hear it, but a friend of mine had said that he had heard Black Scout Survival make a comment about playing bushcraft. And I really like that, because it kind of sums up what I'm going to talk about here. This idea that a lot of people are putting themselves at a disadvantage for the challenge of it. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if you want to spend 20 minutes making the perfect, the bestest feather stick in the world and to make a fire, then by all means go ahead. But 90% of the time, you're not going to need to make a feather stick. Is it good to know how to do that? Sure, because there might be that one-off time when there's a lot of wet wood around, or you can't find any dry tinder, and you need to do something like that in order to start a fire. There's going to be a rare situation, but I mean, where I live, there's birch bark galore, there's dried grass, there's, 1,001 ways to make a fire without ever having to feather stick something. But that's just one example. Now, there are merits to bushcraft. One of my best friends is a avid bushcrafter, and one of the things I envy about the bushcrafters is their minimalist, simple lifestyle. And the reason why it's a simple lifestyle is because it's a self-imposed arrested development, in the sense that they're choosing to limit the amount of technology that's available to them so that they don't end up making more work, which requires more responsibility. Now, that might be counterintuitive. How could a saw like this, which gets a hell of a lot more done faster than something like a handmade wooden bow saw, like the bow? Lots of guys will hand make those, and they have the thing that you twist, and my buddy makes one of those, the Sylvan Boar. Even though this works a lot faster than that, how is it then that this makes for more work? Well, it makes for more work because you can do a hell of a lot more. And I'm going to give you a simple analogy to understand this. The bigger the house, the more responsibility. The bigger the house, the higher your power bill is going to be, the more your heating bill is going to be, the more space you're going to have to maintain and clean. So with great power comes great responsibility. Me personally, I want that technology out there in the field because I don't romanticize going into the wilderness and trying to survive. Some people do though, and I can respect it because they have an intimate, sentimental connection to all of their gear that I will probably never have. My friend Sylvan Boer, all his stuff is handmade, either by himself or by someone else. The guy makes his own bows. All of his sheaths are made. His backpack is handmade. The clothes that he wears are made, and he has a very minimalist system, minimalist way of doing things. Now, his capabilities are very small in terms of how much he can produce in terms of, food procurement, the level of the scale of the shelter that he builds, how many resources he can acquire. That's going to be smaller. It's going to be at a sustainable survival level. In order to take the leap above primitive and thrive, you need technology. And as a huge proponent of technology, I'm going to take that technology because I want to be able to cut enough firewood to last the night in 1/8 of the time. Now, somebody who is an avid bushcrafter might not use as much firewood as I would use, so maybe they use a lot less, they get by with a lot less, they don't need the creature comforts that I necessarily do. But in order to get to a point where you are actually thriving, and this is where it gets challenging, because I can agree that there needs to be some level of sustainability. The true bushcraft hippie, like and I don't mean this in a disparaging way when I say hippie, like Kenton over at Rewild University, somebody who can go out with a loincloth and survive. Probably the only guy on YouTube who has actually done a paracord bracelet survival challenge. The guy went into the ice in the winter time and basically survived with a loincloth in the winter time overnight. I mean, in minus 15 or something like that. So that's about as bushcraft as it gets. The beauty of something like that is the sustainability aspect, is that you're living at a balance with nature. And a lot of people are trying to approach sustainability while blending it with technology. And I think that's where I would like to be down the road. That, so you choose where you want to rest your development. Some people arrest it at the level of bushcraft. Some people are going to rest their development at the level of the homestead, where you have, what is that group of people called, where they live at a certain lifestyle? Amish people. They live at a certain 18th century, standard, where they don't want to go above and beyond that. Because with great power comes more complications, more money, more problems, right? So, and I appreciate the connection that these guys have with their tools. You can see that there's an organic relationship that they have with the tools that they bring out into the field. When, you know, my all-American prepper side of me, you know, could bust out the Husqvarna with a Stihl chainsaw or something like that, go all Wrangle Star on the place, and get 100 times more work done in the same amount of time. But I like to strike a balance. So it definitely is a bit of all-American prepper within me. And the whole point of that character is that it is a caricature of myself, in a way. And some of my more ridiculous doomsday preparedness notions. But I also have the bushcraft hippie in me that respects nature and wants to live with the land, like the true bushcrafter who wants to approximate a lifestyle which was very similar to that of the Native Americans as they're known in the United States. Take, for instance, a guy who lives in a log cabin, like the Learning Self-Reliance guy. You know, obviously had probably a pretty interesting life, which has led himself up to the decision to go and make a cabin in the woods. But for me, that would be a level of arrested development that I could agree on. But at the same time, he's making a name for himself on social media. So he certainly has a foot in the door of the grid. So a lot of people who are, you know, wanting to go off grid but are doing it with a YouTube channel or Facebook, there's somewhat of a contradiction there. And I'm not saying that to be critical of them, because I'm not against the idea of bringing some technology into your off-grid lifestyle. I think that, you know, I'm not averse. There's no rules saying that, oh, you can only have such and such amount of technology. It's all about sustainability, but you can never really be fully self-sustaining this day and age. So a lot of the tools that many of these individuals, and myself included, if I ever embarked on that journey, which I hope to someday, the whole log cabin in the woods thing, to do it with traditional 18th century tools would be quite impressive. The whole Dick Pronicke style of stuff. But even he had supplies flown in, as we all know. So the question is then, why would a person like myself, who wanted to go out into the wilderness to do what, right? If I'm just trying to replicate the world that I came from, the over-cluttered, noisy world that I came from, by bringing all of these tools, all of this firepower out into the wilderness, it seems contradictory that I would even go out into the wilderness in the first place. But the thing is, I still want to sleep under the stars at night. I still want to hear the birds chirping. I just want to do it more comfortably. And I don't think you need to impose these restrictions on yourself that say this has to be this way, and you can't bring any technology into your bug out bag, or you can only bring 10 things because, you know, that's that one-off rare situation where you may need it. And this harkens back to another thing that Chris at the Prepared Mind said once about the 95-5 philosophy, is that a lot of people are spending 95% of their time preparing for the 5% of events that might happen, instead of spending 95% of their time on the 95% of the time stuff that might happen. I've been quite moderate in this respect, in that I respect bushcraft philosophy and I respect the sentiment. I can see that the appreciation of getting something through primitive means. When you go camping and you work all day, or you're in the bush all day, there's nothing like having a meal around the fire. I don't care, you can go to the best restaurant you want. When you've been famished all day for whatever reason, maybe you were just busy doing stuff around the campsite or whatever, when you sit down at the end of the day in front of that fire and you eat that nice warm meal, there is nothing like that. It doesn't even have to be the greatest food. It's the appreciation for it. So I could see how that feeling would be magnified when you're acquiring resources and when you're building things through primitive means. Because really the dopamine is the same. Let's use one of these rich Saudi oil tycoons. You know, the amount of pleasure, the actual chemical that we experience as pleasure in our brain, dopamine, it's the same in everybody else. They're getting the same dopamine by driving their $1 million Lamborghini down the road as the bushcraft guy who sits down for a nice hot meal at night. Same amount of dopamine, same amount of actual pleasure, but two activities, one costs a lot more than the other one. So the whole idea is that you're seeking happiness through materialistic pursuits, and that's an endless thing, it's an insatiable thing. And I'm sure, it's in many religions, it's tied to the dark side, the dark pursuit. And that is the dark side of capitalism that not many people want to comment on for fear of the alternative, which doesn't need any mention on this channel, I'm sure. And I find myself too experiencing a certain gluttony when I'm out there in the bush and I have all this stuff. And part of the inspiration for the bug out rule was that I just had to compartmentalize and organize my life in a simple way. And admittedly, I wanted to make it so that I had a portable closet out in the wilderness, because that's what the bug out roll is. That's its main selling point, is that you unroll this thing, you hang it on a tree, everything is there at arm's reach, and it's all well organized. You can see everything. It's just like something being on a shelf or a drawer system. It's just as it would be organized in your home. You have all that stuff. So to relieve my anxiety about having too much stuff in the wilderness, that's how I was able to achieve that. And it's not just about, oh, you should just bring less stuff and you'd be all right. Well, technology is good. I'm not a technophobe. I'm all about finding some symbiosis with modern technology and nature. There has to be some kind of constructive balance there. Some people would argue that no, you have to arrest your development, otherwise you're going to be like the snake eating its tail, and you're going to eat yourself out of house and home. The Easter Island type thing. You want to constantly expand into what? So yeah, eventually, getting a bigger and bigger house to buy more and more stuff, that is not going to satisfy you in life. And the same principle pertains to what we're talking about here with bushcraft. You may be content with a lean-to shelter. Maybe that's not enough. You may want to build a larger lavu like the armadillo shelter I built. You may want to step it up to a modern tent that you would purchase at a store. Maybe that's not going to be enough. Maybe you want to get, a more semi-permanent, large-scale canvas tent with a wood stove or something like that. Maybe you want to step it up to the log cabin. Maybe once you get the log cabin in there, you want to put a satellite on there so you can get satellite internet and have some way to communicate. Maybe you want to get solar panels, and you can keep scaling it up and up and up until you're pretty much back where you were at the grid, only hopefully you're self-sustaining. So it's all about sustainability and being at a balance and not taking more from nature than can be given back, because right now we're totally disproportionate in this world, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm a contributing factor to this. I can honestly say that my lifestyle is not sustainable enough. I need to improve on the environmental friendly nature of my activities. That's something I need to improve on. Is bushcraft silly? It's silly if you're just doing it to try to prove a point to yourself. Now that could be disguised as learning, trying to teach yourself. Fine. But I don't think you should act as though there is a book of rules, a scripture of sorts, which dictates what a person should do in a survival situation. A true survivalist will use anything at their disposal. That's what I really liked about Les Stroud, Survivor Man, is that he would take like something like a things that you might have if you were in a plane crash, and that you might find in the remnants of the plane crash, and he would try to survive with that. So he would find like an old video VHS tape, and he would take the tape out of that VHS, and he would use that as lashing to make a shelter. Or he would dismantle a camera and use some of the metal and some of the electrodes to start a fire or something like that. To me, survivalism is a more MacGyver thing, which shouldn't be bound to just primitive technology. Especially considering that for many of us it's a luxury to play bushcraft. There's a channel on YouTube called Primitive Technology that everybody's aware of, but you may not be aware of the other channel, which is very much like Primitive Technology, or I should say that Primitive Technology is like this channel, because these people, the ones that you never hear about, are the true primitive survivalists, because they're out living it in the jungle somewhere. There's very few tribes that remain that actually live, and haven't had any sort of constant contact with humans. They've probably all been contacted, but there's a few where they're kind of left alone. Those are the real survivalists, the real primitive. All of what we're doing is a desire to get back to those roots, but we can conveniently go back into our heated homes afterwards and go on the internet and use our video editors and make videos about what we've done. And anybody who you see on YouTube is that person. It doesn't matter how primitive they are. I mean, Primitive Technology is as primitive as it gets in terms of bushcraft on YouTube. I mean, the guy goes into the wilderness with a loincloth, beats things up with a rock, makes various things, and lives what appears to be a fairly satisfying lifestyle in the wilderness. Well, at least, that's what we see of that end. We probably don't see the part where he's going to his computer and uploading and editing the videos. And I don't mean that as a criticism. I just mean that's the reality, is that the real people who are out there doing it because they have to, living that hunter-gathering egalitarian level of subsistence, they don't have the technological means, because if they did, they probably wouldn't be living like that. Probably a lot of them, once they get a taste of Coca-Cola, that's it. Even the ones who resist still integrate and appropriate certain aspects of colonialist cultures by choice. So it's not, that's a long debate within itself. Anyways, what do you guys think about this? I've rambled on long enough. Probably lost lots of you a long time ago, but it's a fascinating topic, because all of these things that we do, I believe that there's philosophical and psychological ramifications to this whole survival field. We'll just call it survival, and that encompasses everything from bushcraft, homesteading, prepping, all the rest. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Don't forget, if you want a Sugawaza 10% off in the description, check that out. CanadianPreparedness.com. Get yourself a bug out roll as well. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.